Today we're going to be making this this memory card game with JavaScript. So let's take a look at how it works first. You click on a card and it flips over. Click on another card. If not the same, after a little bit, they turn back over, right? If we get two of the same card, they stay face up. If you click on them again, they shouldn't do anything. So let's just play this game out here, okay? And you see the score increments every time we get a card set right. Okay, and then once we get all the cards right, we get a you win message, and then we can't really click on anything else, but we can click this new game button to reset it and play another game, and you'll notice the score goes back to 0 and the win message disappears. All right, so that's the main gist of what we're going to make. So let's get started. You're going to need to make a new folder, and I called mine memory game. Once you have that new folder, there should be nothing in it to start with, just blank. And then let me close out of the card game I just had running for us there. Okay, and inside of this new inside this new memory game folder, you're gonna see I have a few files here already. I just pre-installed them to save 20 minutes of loading. My internet's not the fastest, so we're gonna run npm install. I'm gonna kind of show you what to type, and then you can hit enter on it and install it. As I said, I've already done it. So first we'll do npm init-y and hit enter on that, and it'll give default values. You can change those later in the package.json. So go ahead and hit enter, and that'll create your package.json here. And then after you've done that, we're going to install three things: npm i --save, and you're going to install Parcel Bundler, Parcel Bundler, and the last one is my library easy read. And go ahead and hit enter on that. That's going to take some time. That's the thing that I pre-installed. Once that's installed, you'll have this node modules folder, and the libraries and all the resources for those will be in there. So we don't really need to be in there, but know that that folder will be there, and you'll probably get a package lock.json. All right, so you've done that, and now we need to create. Well, first thing you'll notice is there were images, right? There are all these cards, and we need to make those cards. So what I used was a program called see if I can pronounce it right. Medibang. It's this program right here, and what it does is it's kind of like a free Photoshop. I don't know if it has all the tools of Photoshop or not. I've not used Photoshop, but it's got a similar vibe to that, where you can kind of create what you'd like in it. And I've created those card faces, and you can get them in the description below. Just the links for the cards will be there. Click on those, save them to your computer, and just save them into a folder, and then we'll put them in this project. So I'm gonna open a new folder here, hopefully. While that's opening, yeah, let's get it over here, memory game. All right, and I've chose to call this folder inside of pictures memory game, right? And for this one, I only need this one is one that I never ended up using. I used these 5. So once you've got the 5 images downloaded that I've created from the description below into a folder, then we're going to take those and we're going to put them inside of a new folder here. And so let's make a new folder here in our memory game called sprites. Oops, that's sprites.txt. That's not what we want. Move it. Yeah, new folder. There we go. Sprites. And then inside of sprites is where we're going to drop all these PNG files. So drag and drop. Boom. And we got our 5 cards. So take a second to load, but should appear here. An error occurred. Let's look at this one, see if it works. There we go. All right, so maybe the card back just took some time. There it is. All right, and we got our 5 card pictures, right? They're all the same pixels, pixel width, and all that, so that's nice. They're going to be too big, but we'll sort through that in a minute. All right, so we have Parcel installed. That's our JavaScript bundler, and we have our images. Now we need a HTML file. So let's make a new file and call it index.html. And if you, I have the Emmet shortcut going. If I type the exclamation point and tab, it's going to create this boilerplate for me. If you don't, feel free to type out some boilerplate here. Mainly you just need this tag, the head, and the body tags, and this HTML tag also. So these metas you could do without if you really wanted to, not a problem. In the title, let's call it memory game. And we're going to immediately link a index.css and index.javascript file to it, just so we have them. So link CSS, and let's call it index.css. You can call it style.css, whatever you'd like. And down here, we're going to do a script tag with a source of index.js. Save it, and we're just going to make sure these are all this is working. Let's put an h1 of test. Save. And now we need these two files, index.js. In this one, I'm just going to do console.log hi to make sure that this JS file is attached to this HTML file. And then we're going to do a index.css file. And inside of there, we have we know we have the h1 in the HTML. And we're just going to say color green, yellow green even, so that we can definitely see it yellow green. And that's just to make sure all this is linked up to this HTML right and correctly. Now down the terminal, to get this to work, we're using Parcel to bundle everything, and we're going to use that because we're splitting our JavaScript code into modules, and we installed that easy read library that we want to use from npm. So to run this code, instead of clicking, sometimes there'll be a open live down here, or you can run it as just in your console. If you do that, the JavaScript modules thing won't work. That's why we're using Parcel. There's something else that won't work. I can't remember what it is, but anyways, so to run this, to get it working, npx parcel index.html. I think I also have Parcel installed globally, but I use npx. It just works better for me. We're going to let that load for a second. It takes 5 to 10 seconds. Hopefully loads. Give it some time. Yep. All right, and you're going to see it's building it, and it's going to be running at localhost 1234. Which is what we had up, but I had the finished program running on it. So when I refresh this now, it's going to be our new program running on it, and we should see that test, that h1 test that we have. So it's building it. All right, built, perfect. So go over here, refresh, and there it is, the yellow green test. And if we do Control-Shift-I or right-click inspect, we're going to get the console, and we want to make sure the JavaScript's hooked up to it. And here we get that hi in the console, which is perfect. That's exactly what we want. So back we go to the project. We no longer need that test. We know it's hooked up. Save, and in the CSS, let's get rid of that. And in the index.js, let's get rid of the console.log. All right, so we know everything's hooked up to the HTML. Now we need to get our cards inside of the HTML. So we're going to create a div with a class, and I'm going to call it card container. I would recommend using semantic HTML. If you can think of a better tag than div to use, please do. I just built this and used div. I didn't really think about it too much. So I have a div with a class of card container, and inside of there I'm going to need 8 images, right? Because we have 8 cards that we need to make appear. So img, and we're going to give each card a class of card and a ID, a different ID. So img.card times 8 will give us 8 card images, or 8 image tags, with a class of card. And there they are. And each image is going to have the same source. Now, what's the source for it? It's going to be the card back. And in this case, this is what we want. So where is that in relation to where we are? We have index.html. We need to go into the sprites folder, so /sprites, and then /card-sprites. back.png because it's a PNG file. The alt tag is going to be, let's just say card for now. It already has a class. Let's give it an ID equals card, and we're going to say card 0, and there's going to be 8 cards total, so card 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You could name it ID card 1 through 8, but it lines up better with the JavaScript array to do 0 through 7. And then let's go ahead and add a width to width equals. You can play around with the width and height. When you first load it, it's going to be way too big. So I'm just going to skip that bit and just add in the width and height right away that I know works, which is 200 pixels and 300 pixels. You can change those to whatever you like. And actually, instead of the 8 images, I'm just going to do 1 and then copy and paste it 7 more times, so I don't have to type all that out. Oop. If I don't miss things. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All right, so we should have 8 cards there. And you'll notice they all have card ID 0, though. That's no good. Each tag should have a unique ID. 4, 5, 6, 7. All right, so 0 through 7 on the IDs. Each card has a class of card. Let's save it. And you'll notice Parcel automatically rebuilds it for us. So if we click back in here, now we have our 7 cards. And they're not spaced very well, so let's get them spaced a little bit better. To do that, we can go to, let me just make sure that I'm doing it correctly for you here. Yeah, so index.css, and we can make some rules to go with our card container. So all our cards are inside of that div with the class of card container, so .card container. All right, and we're gonna do display grid. I'm keeping the CSS to a minimum so we can focus really on the code and kind of how the JavaScript and how that works. Grid, template, columns, and we're gonna want four different columns, each with 2 cards, right? So we can do auto, 4 different autos, auto, 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 auto. So we want 4 columns, and then a row gap. A row gap is between the row gap is between the first and top and bottom cards in each column. So there'll be a top card and a bottom card, and there'll be 10. We're gonna say there's 10 pixels between each top and bottom card. Save that, and you see it rebuilds again. Head over to our site, and this is the row gap I was talking about. These 10 pixels here, and there's 4 columns, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's the setup. Right now, if we click, it doesn't do anything, but those are card backs. Now we should also add in, right? There was a new game button and a score, so let's add those in before we head over to the JavaScript. So back to our HTML, hopefully. Wrong one, there we go. And you'll notice I have these side by side. I'm not claiming to have all this memorized, so I'm kind of I'm rebuilding it with you, but I also have it pre-built, so because I like building the project initially and then walking you through it. All right, so above that card container div, we're going to make a new kind of container. So div dot, I'm going to call it display board, a class of display board. And then inside of that div, I'm going to have an h1 with, h1 with a class of score. And inside of that, we'll set an initial text value of score to 0. We're going to have an h1 with another class of win message. And eventually that's where we'll display our win message, right? But it's empty for now because there's no win right now. Button, a button with a class of new game. And the text inside of it's going to be the same as the class new game. Save that, head over to our site, and you'll see that they're stacked. We have our h1, and then the win game would go here, and the button. Now we don't want them to be stacked. We want them to be in the top, kind of filling out the top row there. So to do that, we need to remember this display board class. Let's head over to our index.css. And underneath card container, we're going to do display board. It's It's going to look very similar to the card container. We're going to do display grid. And we know that there's only 3 things in this display board, right? The score, the win message, and the buttons. So we're going to do grid template columns again, and just auto, auto, auto. And each one will have its own third of space in the top row. And there it is, score. When the win message appears, it'll be here, and the button. All right, so now we have everything, but nothing works. But we have the layout set up, and we got the visuals done, the CSS. Of course, you can customize this button however you'd like, but I'd like to get into the JavaScript. So here we go. Just a little bit trickier, but not too bad. So at the top of every JavaScript file we're going to have useStrict for now. So useStrict at the top of index.js. And eventually we'll be importing some stuff. Actually, we need to first make those things, right? So we need to go and grab a lot of this stuff that's in the HTML file, including the score, the win message, let's see, look at my other one here. The card fronts, even the card back, and the card container itself. So we're gonna grab all this in a different JavaScript file and then import that stuff into this index.js. So we'll leave index.js blank for now. Let's create a model.js file. All right, at the top, we're going to do useStrict. And then underneath, we're going to import a couple things from that easy read library that we imported. It's my own custom library. It has like a shuffle function we're going to use, which is it's based off the Fisher-Yates algorithm. It shuffles we're gonna shuffle arrays with it, and we're gonna import a seal function, which is similar to object.seal that you see in JavaScript. So import shuffle seal from easy read. All right, and then underneath that we need to now because of the way Parcel's set up, we can't just keep referring to the pictures inside of the sprites folder. We need to, we're going to make them variables to make it a little easier on us and Parcel so that it reads, so we don't get errors. We're going to make each card front and the card back a variable. So each of these will become a variable. Let's do that. Const front1 equals require. It's going to be .sprites/front1.png, I believe. Double check. That's correct. Yep. And then again, because we have to get into the sprites folder and then into the image. I'm going to copy and paste that because we need the other 3 fronts, right? There's 4 fronts total: the dog, cat, giraffe, and penguin was the 4th one. So we'll do the same for front 2, front 3, and front 4. And then we also need the card back, right? So const, I'm just going to call it back equals require .sprites/card-back.png. Okay, and as we do this, oops, and we need to rename these front 2, 3, and 4. 2, 3, 4, save. As we do this, I'm just going to check over here once in a while to make sure we're not getting any errors in the console. Okay, so we've got some variables. We imported some functions, but we're not using them yet, and that's okay. Let's grab the stuff from this HTML. So we'll grab some of these items here. We're going to do const card container equals document dot query selector. And we're going to grab the tag with the class card container. So it's the parent element of all the cards. Const new game button, and you can bet we're going to grab the new game button with this. Dot new game. The button has a class of new game, so that's how we grab that. Const scoreboard. We need the scoreboard. So this is the display score, right? This is the visual score that we're seeing displayed. Document dot query selector, and we're going to grab dot score. And the last one is the win message, right? There's nothing in it right now, but we're going to need it eventually. document.query selector, and we're going to grab the win message, the win message h1 tag, and it has the class of win message. All right, so, and that's another reason I named them the classes kind of after exactly what they are, so that we don't forget when we go to select them all. All right, and last thing we need is we need this array of cards, but we need card fronts for this. So we need an array of 8 card fronts to go with all these card backs. So to do that, we can do const, and I'm going to call it card front array equals, and this is where the seal function up right here comes into play. We can just say object.seal, or we can use the seal function from EasyRead, and it does the same thing. It will, once we create the array, you can't add or delete things from the array. You can change the items that already exist, but you can't like add a 9th item to this 8-item array. You can't delete one and make it a 7-item array. So we'll do seal, and then we're going to create the array inside of the seal function. So front 1, because we need each card front we need 2 of. So front 1, front 1, front 2, front 2, front 3, front 3, front 4, front 4. Now I can tell you this isn't going to be a fun game exactly, right? If every single time that we click it's front 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4, it's predictable and it's going to be easy to win. So each time we play the game, we want the cards to be shuffled and completely random. So to do that, underneath card front array, we can do const shuffled card fronts equals, and this is where we use the shuffle function, shuffle. And what are we shuffling? The card front array. And what that's going to do is it's going to randomly change these cards each time. So we can prove that in just, it's going to take a second to prove because of the way the model.js is set up. It's not hooked up to the index yet, right? So let's hook that up and then we'll prove that. So each time we run the game, we need to shuffle this card front array. And we're going to export all this stuff in an object. So card container, new game button, shuffled card fronts, back, scoreboard, and win message. If you'd like to put them in alphabetical order, it's up to you. It's just the way I did it. So we're exporting all these as an object. And where are we going to import them into? It's going to be into our index.js file. So now we can say import, and we're going to take that object, card container, and here I am going to put them in alphabetical order. New game button, scoreboard, win message. From, and where are we importing them from? That model, that's model.js file. And let's make sure that works, console.log, and we're going to pick the shuffled card fronts. Did we import that? Yeah. So let's log the shuffled card fronts, and every time it should be different, right? So saving it, it's connected everything, build it. So there's our card fronts, front 2, 3, 4, 1. Okay, so you see the order here. If we click refresh on this, it should give us a new random array of card fronts. Now it's 2, 3, 1. Let's see, refresh. 1, 4, 4. 1, 3, 1. And if you do Control R, that also refreshes. And you'll see each time this card array is shuffled, which is good because we don't want the same cards. Now they don't appear yet, but we're getting there. All right. So that was our model.js file. Now we're working inside of the actual index.js file with all of these tags we grabbed from the HTML file and from the pictures. Cool. So we're going to need an event listener on the card container in order to tell if we've clicked on a card, right? All these cards are inside of the div with card container. So we can do card container that we grabbed in the model dot add event listener. And we're listening for a click, and on click, we want to run the game. Okay, and it's as easy as that. And then let's create our run game function. Now, when I create these functions, my JavaScript functions are going to look a little more like C#. I've been coding in that recently, and I really like how the spacing's laid out with how they use their if statements and functions. So that's how I'm going to use mine right now. But of course, you can use standard JavaScript styling, right? So function run game. It takes in an event, right? That click event. And this is what I mean by JavaScript styling versus C#. So in JavaScript, you would do that. You'd have the open brace on this function line and then the close brace down here. In C#, it looks like this, and I really like that, which also works in JavaScript. So I'm going to do it this way. It's not conventional, but I really like the way it looks. Yeah, so it takes in this event, and this event has a lot of information attached to it, right, based on what you click. So we need to get information from that event. So if we, for now, we could just say console.log event, and you're gonna see a huge amount of stuff logged. So we click on anything here, and you're gonna see, okay, it's a mouse event, and it's got all this information attached. Specifically, we want the target, right? There's a lot of information about the target here that we click on, depending on what we click, and you're gonna see each mouse event gets logged when we click, which is great. That's what we want. So let's refresh that. Head back to our code. Now we don't want the whole event, we want specifics. So specifically the card ID that we click on. So const card equals event.target.id. We want the number of the ID. So the ID is going to be card 0, card 1, card 2, and specifically we want to get an integer number out of the ID. We don't need the CSS anymore. So to do that, we can do const card num equals, and before we do that, let's import one thing from my easy read library, one function, import drop from dot slash, oops, nope, from easy read. There we go. And let's put that, excuse me, let's put that, excuse me again, above our local imports. So our more external imports will go above our local ones. And this drop function, kind of show you what it does here. If, let's say we have card 4, and I just want, we'll do it in just comments down here. Say we have card 4 as a string, and I want to get just that number 4 out, right? So I could run this drop function on it. So I could say let my num, I could say let my num equal drop, and then how many things do I want to drop from the string? Well, I want to drop C, A, R, D, and this hyphen, so 5 things. I'm going to drop the first 5 things, and from what am I dropping it? I'm dropping it from this whole thing, which in our case is stored in this card variable, so I'm dropping them from card. And that's it. That's how that drop function works. So let's use it. And of course, we don't want that number to be, it's a string number, right? So the ID is a string, and we're just getting it down to a number. Let's show you that first. So drop 5 from the card, and then we can say something like console.log type of card num, and we're gonna see that's a string. We can also log the card num, right? So not confirm console.log card num. All right. And if we do that, we go over here, you can see that's card number 1, which makes sense, and it's a string. Card 0, card 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. But we don't want these numbers to be strings, we want them to be ints. So in JavaScript, one way to convert it, and I think it's the most readable way, you're more welcome to debate it in the comment section if you don't, but just by surrounding it in number, the number function that's built into JavaScript converts it to a number. I don't think there's anything more readable than just the number function saying, hey, this is now a number. All right, so we have a number here and an ID here. Perfect. Next thing is we want the source from the event, right? So what is the source? Because if it's a card back, we need to know that. Or if it's a card front, we need to know that. It depends if we flip the card or not. So let's get the source. So we can do const source equals event dot target dot src. And that's going to get the source for the card. And then we need to see if a card is flipped or not, right? So when we click on a card, is that card a card back? If it's a card back, then it's not flipped. If it's a card front, it's flipped, and we don't want to do anything. So we can say const is flipped, and it's going to be a Boolean value if it's flipped or not. And we're going to create a function called maybe flip. And inside of that, we're going to take in the card ID, so card. And maybe we should call this card ID, right? Not just card. Card ID. It's going to take in the card ID. I guess we need to change that here too. I called it card in the original, but I think it makes more sense to call it card ID, right? Card num and source. All right, and I already know this is going to be a little bit of code, so I'm going to break it out into its own module here, this maybe flip function, and we'll import it back into here. So let's, before we forget, let's say, well, we'll get it in a second. Let's not do that. So this is going to return a value of if the card is already flipped or not, right? So let's create a new file, and I'm going to call it flip card.js, and just make sure we're doing it right. Click into it here. Okay. We're gonna bring in the card fronts array, shuffled card fronts from the model. So import shuffled card fronts from, and we'll see how that's used in a second, from the model.js. And then we're going to create our maybe flipped function, maybe flip. So function maybe flip. Inside of there, it's going to take the card ID, card num, and source of the card. Okay, and if the source is a card back, right? If the source is the back of a card, then we want to flip the card. If it's not, we do not want to flip the card, right? So, and we'll say, hey, the card's already been flipped. So if source triple equals, and in my case, there's a few ways to do this, and I'd actually like to give you importing the card back a try. I don't think it's going to work, but let's try it. Import back. Oh, back is part of the model, right? I don't think this will work, but I do want to try it, and then we'll go to the way I know that works. If this card source is equal to the back of the card, then we're going to want to flip. For now, let's say console.log is back. And that's it. So if it's a card back, we're going to log, hey, it's the card back. Now this won't work yet because we need to import it in our index so that it can be part of this. I'm pointing to it like you can see that part of this maybe flip function. So import maybe flip from /flip card or flip card JS, and now it'll work in this index function. So let's go back here. All right, yeah. Type error flip card dot maybe flip is not a function. All right, and why is that? It's because we didn't export this flip function. That's the issue. So we need to do export default maybe flip. All right, save it. Now we should get a different error. No, we don't. Because when we import it, then we don't need to destructure it here. We're only exporting just a maybe flip function. So we just import it as the maybe flip function. No need to put it in the brackets. All right, and then when we click, you're gonna see there's no error, but there's also no log. And that would be because the card back that I imported just isn't working. So let's get rid of that. And what I do know that works for now if you run this in a development environment, you're gonna have to get a variable in for this, or a way to get around this. But what I did was, because I'm running it locally, I don't plan on pushing this anywhere into production, is I grabbed the what I know the cardback logs as in the local host, right? So if you use this outside of your local host, you're going to need a variable for this, because it's not going to be localhost every time as the source. But for now, this will work. So if we click on a cardback, we're going to log is back. Let's give it a try. Yeah. So each cardback here is indeed a cardback. That's good. Now we need to get a little more complex though. If the source is a card back, right, then what do we want to do? We want to flip the card, and it's going to take in, we're going to create our own function for that. It's going to take in a card ID and card num. And then after we flip the card, we want to return true, because this is flipped variable is expecting a return value of if we flip the card or not. And you don't need an else here. This is option. You could just do return false otherwise, so you could just do return false. But in this case, I think it's more readable to do else return false, because it's if or else. That's it. And I think it reads more like a story to include that else inside of it, right? So I'm saving it. And these are all cardbacks, so it doesn't matter what we click. Ooh, flip card is not defined. Right, okay. So let's make this flip card function, right? Because if it's a cardback, which they all are, we want to run the flip card function. So let's make that, and then we'll check it out. Function flip card takes in the card ID and the card num. And we're gonna say, what we want to do here is change the source of the card that was clicked. So we know the card back was clicked, and we want to grab that card, that particular card, from the HTML. We want to grab that ID of the card that was clicked, and then we want to change its source to the front. So here we go, document .query selector. And I'm going to use backticks here, and we're going to grab the hashes for ID. And what's the ID that we're grabbing? We're grabbing the card, and it's going to be card. Oh no, you know what? We have the whole card ID, so we can do hash card, yeah, dollar card ID. So the card ID is the variable here, and the hash out front says, hey, that's an ID. And we're going to change its source. And that's going to be to, this is where we imported the shuffle card fronts, right? So it's the shuffle card fronts were these, but randomly. And whatever the ID is, so if it's ID 0, if it's the first card we click on, the second card, the third card, whichever it is, we want that to co-align with whatever random card is in this shuffled card fronts array. So whatever card is in that particular position of the ID, that's the card that we want to flip. So we can say the source is equal to shuffled card fronts card num. Because remember, this card num is 0 through 7, and it's going to line up with this card ID 0 through 7. And the card fronts was an array of sources, an array of image sources. So that's where we're at. So the flip card should now work. Let's give it a try. So if we click on something with a back, it should flip. And if we click it again, it shouldn't do anything, which it does, right? It just returns false. If the source isn't a back, return false. If it is a back, we want to flip the card. So now they all flip, which is great, but nothing else happens. Okay, so we're that far. Head back into your index.js file, and then we can say if, I'm going to say if the card is flipped, right? If the card was flipped, if it wasn't flipped, then we don't need to do anything. We just, nothing happens, right? If you click a card that's already been flipped, nothing should happen. But if it is flipped, then we want to store that value in a temporary array, because we need to check if the most recent two cards flipped are the same. And to check, to keep those in memory of the most recent two cards flipped, we're going to store those values inside of arrays. So we're actually going to create some variables up here, specifically three things. Let last, and we're using let here because this is going to change. Let last two flipped equal an empty array. Let last two IDs equal an empty array. And I'm just going to go ahead and add this one. It doesn't relate to this, but let score equal 0, and we're going to use that later. So the last two flipped and the last two IDs are important here. We're going to get the ID of the card that's flipped and the, let's see, I don't want to say it wrong, so give me 1 second. And the source of the card that's flipped, and we're going to store that. The source here and the ID here. And maybe you want to call that last two sources. I'm going to keep it the same for now, but I'd recommend calling it last two sources. All right, so if the card's flipped, then we want to say, hey, the last two flipped. We want to push the source of that card that was flipped into the last two flipped array. Or, you know what? I'm going to call it last two sources because it's bothering me. Last two sources. There we go. Pushing the source into last two sources if the card was flipped. And that source will be the card front at this point. And last two IDs dot push, and we're pushing the card ID that we had earlier that we made up here. So now we have an array of one item and one item. Okay. And then we need to say, hey, every time a card is flipped, we need to check if there's a match or not. So to do that, I can do const is match equals maybe check match. And we're checking on what? The last two sources, because we want to see if the last two sources are the same. Now is match is again going to be probably some type of Boolean value. And this maybe check match, we're going to leave, do we leave it or split it? Let's see. Let's split it. So we're going to create this function in a different module here. New file. Check match.js. All right. Just make sure we're doing this right. Flip. Yep. Okay. So close the flip card. All right. So function maybe check match. It's going to take in the last two sources, right? In this case, it's only one source, right? If you only click on one card, there's only one source in there. We'll get to that in just a second. If last two sources dot length triple equals 2. So if there are two card sources in that last two sources array, then we want to check for a match. If it's not, we don't even want to bother. We don't want to bother. So if the last two sources, if there are two sources in the last two sources array, then we want to return check for match. And that's going to take in the last two sources, and we'll make that function in just a second. Else, it's not viable, right? You can't check one source, so else we're just going to return null, and we're not going to return undefined. We're going to return null, so we know specifically that that was us placed, right? The computer only places undefined, but we can specifically say, hey, if there's not two things in the source, return null, which is fine. Null is a falsy value, so it will not evaluate to true. So this is match will be null if the last two sources only has one thing in it or no things in it. But if it has two things in it, we want to check for that match, right? So function check for match, and we're going to take in the last two sources, and we're going to say const is match equals last two sources, and the last two sources 0 should be equal to the last two sources 1. So the first and second item of that last two sources array should be equal. And if it's a match, right? If it's a match, they're equal. So this will be true if it's a match, false if it's not a match. And we're going to return if it's a match or not. Return is match. Return that Boolean value. All right, and can't do what we forgot last time, and that's export default. And we only need to export the maybe check match function. The check for match is only part of helping that maybe check match function, right? So export that. Then we need to import it in our index.js. Import maybe check match from check match. Save. And we should be able to console.log is match. All right, so for every two cards we flip, it should say if they're a match or not. False. Okay, the first one was null because you can't check a match of one thing. And then these two are not the same, so it's false. Null, null. Yeah, okay. And it's going to be different every time, right? So we'd have to get a match to see if the true thing works, right? So let's give it a few tries here. Can't take too long to get a match. False, false. Give it like 5 more tries. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. What's the odds of that? 5. Give it 1 more. All right, so we're gonna assume for now that it will be true if we get 2 that are the same. We just weren't that lucky, and that's okay. So is match be true if there's a match? All right, and we're almost done. We're getting there. So, yeah. So if there is a match, then we want to. There's going to be some logic associated with matching, and we're going to create a function for that called run match. Logic is match. So not even if there is a match, right? So if it's true, false, or null, we're going to use this run match logic on it. So check for the match and then run the match logic on the result of this is match value. Function run match logic, and it's going to take in if it's a match or not. All right, if is match is null. All right, so if there's no possible way to be a match, just return. Else if, else if. Now you could just say else if is match, right? Because his match is true, but just for readability and clarity, I'm gonna say if match triple equals true. And again, you don't need that. You could just say else if is match. I just like the clarity of it. If it's true, then what do we want to do? We have this score variable up here. So if 2 things are similar, we need to increase the score by 1. Score plus plus. Or you could say score plus equals 1. Up to you, style choice. And then what do we want to do? We want to update the display score. Update display score. We'll create a function for that in just a second. And we want to clear these last 2 arrays if it's a match, right? So we're going to clear these so we can check. You know what? This wouldn't have worked earlier. This is match because we didn't clear the arrays yet. We would have just kept building and building the arrays. So these 2 arrays we're going to clear so that we can add 2 new sources and check if those sources are matches. So let's say clear. We'll just call it clear 2 arrays because we know what those arrays are. All right, and that's pretty much it for that. Oh no, right? And then else, forgot else. So if there is nothing to compare, just return. Else if there is a match, then update the score, the display score from that updated score, and then clear the arrays. Else we want to if the two cards that are flipped are not a match, right, then we need to reset those two cards because they're not the same. So they need to be flipped back to their backs. So let's create a function for that called reset last two cards, right? We want this to kind of read like a story if we can. And then clear two arrays. Because either way, if it's a match or not, we need to clear those arrays of two values so that we can put two more new values in to compare and see if those are a match or not. So again, try to get it to read like a story. If there's no chance of being that match, return. If the match is true, add 1 to the score, update the display, and clear the arrays. If there is no match, reset the last two cards to their backs and clear the arrays. Now let's make these functions happen. All right, so we need an update score. Function update score. It's not going to take in anything. It's a very much working with the DOM. And all this is score board. Oh, I guess update display score. There we go. We're gonna say score board dot enter, and you could play around with text content, enter HTML. I just use enter HTML for now. Dot enter HTML equals score. So instead of score 0, we want to be score 1, score 2, score 3, or score 4, right? And that's it for update display score. Next one is let's do clear last two arrays. Function clear last or clear two arrays. And we're just, all that function does is set the last two sources equal to an empty array, and the last two IDs equal to an empty array. That's it for clear two arrays. And the last one we have is reset the last two cards, right? So here we go. Let's give these some space. Function reset last two cards. All right, and we need to get the IDs of, or we need to get the tags, the actual elements from the HTML of the last two cards, right? So we can do const card1, or yeah, card1. This will just be the first card in the array, in the array elements of the two cards. So document dot query selector, and again we're gonna do this bit here where we do last two IDs, and we want the first of the last two for that one. We're gonna copy and paste for the second of the two arrays. All right, we'll call that card 2. And then what do we want to do? So after, you could flip them immediately, but that doesn't make for a very realistic gameplay. So what we want to do is we want to set a timeout on them of, like, let's say half a second. So after like half a second, you just get to glance at that second card, flip both back over. Because if you do it immediately, you'll never see that second card, and it kind of defeats the purpose of the game. So we can do set timeout. And it's going to take a callback function here. Item, oops, whoa. Item 1, card 1. I called it item 1 in my original, don't like it. Source equals back. Card2 dot source equals back. Excuse me, so we're setting it equal to the image back. After 500 milliseconds, which is half a second. And that's it for resetting the last two cards, right? So now we should have a fully functioning game minus resetting the game. So everything should work except the game button right now, the reset button. Let's make sure here. Yeah. Oh, we don't have a win message yet, so let's see. Clear those two. Okay, we'll get to the win message, but we should have a functioning game. Yeah, not the same, so they flip back. They're the same, so they stay. not the same, flip back, not the same, same, so they stay, and the score increases. All right, so now we need that win message, and we need to do something with that button, and we are done. So go back up to our run game function here. All right, we ran the match logic, and we made all the functions necessary for that. After we run the match logic and check for the match, then we want to see if it's a win, right? So if score, because there's you can score a total of 4 points. If score triple equals 4, and you could set that to your own variable if you want, like const win is equals to score triple equals 4. But if score triple equals 4, then we want to change the win message, this inner HTML, to you win. You did it, yay. Okay, so let's make sure that works. So once the score hits 4, it should change. But that means we gotta get stuff right. Dog, yeah. Penguin, nope. Penguin, cat. We get the you win message. Now this new game button doesn't do anything. This is where when we click it, we need to delete this, reset the score, and flip all these to their backs. And that's actually easier than it would seem. So let's do that, and we're done. So we actually need to add a event listener again. So new, remember with that new game button we imported way back? We want to add a click event listener to that button. And on click, we want to reset the game. Now we need to make that reset game function. Gonna make it at the bottom here. Function reset game. All right, and to reset the game, we need to reset all the cards, and that'll be its own function. No, not the last two. Reset them all. That'll be its own function in just a minute. We're gonna set the score back to 0. We want to set the scoreboard, the inner HTML of the scoreboard back to 0. Score 0. And we want the win message, inner HTML, set equal to nothing again. And so that's pretty much resetting the game. We just need to reset all the cards, make that function for that. So function reset cards. And we're going to say for. In this case, we're going to use a for loop. Let I equal 0. When I is less than or equal to 7, I plus plus. This is where naming, another point of where naming our cards 0 through 7 come in handy and not 1 through 8. So const, and we're going to call this variable image equals document dot query selector. And what are we selecting? We're selecting the card. We're gonna get the ID of the card. We need every card to change, and the IDs are cards 0 through 7. So we can say card I. So this would be card 0 the first time, card 1 the second time, and we're gonna grab each of the cards in this for loop instead of individually writing, right? So the first time through is card 0. We store an image, and then we change its source to the card back. And then the second time through, it's the first card, change it to the card back. Third card, fourth, and it resets all the cards. That's it. Yeah, let's make sure that works. Let's just get one match here. All right, I saw that. Getting tired. Okay, so I don't have to go through them all. Yeah, definitely getting tired, right? But okay. You went, now if we click new game, everything resets, which is exactly what we want. And even if you only have like one thing like this, you can still reset the game and it'll work. That's pretty much it. So just to sum up, we used JavaScript, HTML, CSS, bundled stuff with Parcel, split code into modules, and that's about it. So if you like the video, please subscribe, like the video. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.